Hi, I'm Sanjay Nagchowdhury, Development Lead for the IBM App Connect Enterprise product. In this video, I will demonstrate in detail how to configure App Connect Enterprise to use Business Transaction Monitoring. I've already described an overview of Business Transaction Monitoring in a previous video, so please watch that video to see how to use Business Transaction Monitoring. So, Business Transaction Monitoring allows you to monitor a transaction end-to-end through various message flows deployed on different integration servers that are owned by an integration node, so that you can track and view the life cycle of a message as it is processed by App Connect Enterprise. A business transaction is a unit of function from a business perspective. Business transaction monitoring requires you to define monitoring events in your message flows. Each monitoring event must have a global transaction identifier. This is needed so that ACE can correlate the monitoring events as part of a single business transaction. Having defined and deployed your message flows with monitoring events, you can create a business transaction definition. A business transaction definition comprises of individual business events, and in the business event, you specify which monitoring event is part of the business transaction by defining it with a particular type, like start, progress, end, or failure. So I'm going to take you through a live demo by creating a node from scratch and configuring business transaction monitoring. So here on the right hand side, you can see a list of commands that I am going to be running, and you'll be able to see that I'll be creating the database tables and I'll be running the ACE commands to set up the node and configure it. I already have my flows created, and I've already defined monitoring events on my flows. So this is the main flow which receives the messages. And on it, on this particular main flow, I have 3 monitoring events defined. And later on, I'll be using these monitoring events as a start event, an end event, and a failure event. So for example, this particular node here has got an event in the out terminal. And if I look at it, you can see that it uses a global transaction correlator, which uses a customer number, which is inside the message. And I have 3 other flows which are in a separate application. So this particular flow is the main process flow that's in Retail app. I have a separate app which is called Retail Order Item app, and then there I have 3 flows. So I have a request flow, a dispatch flow, and a response flow. And I will be selecting monitoring events from them later on. I also have a queue manager already defined. It's called BTMQM, and I've already run the script so that the App Connect Enterprise system queues are already defined. So you can see the system.broker.dc queues are already created here. But other than that, I'm going to be creating things from scratch. So first of all, I need to create some database tables. So this is where the events will be stored, and these are then used to show the business transactions through the web UI. So I need to first cd to this directory. I'm already in that directory, and in this directory I have some scripts which I can run. So the first script I'm going to run is to run the data capture schema script. So I run that with, I'm using DB2 here. There are Oracle scripts as well. So I'll run this first. So that's created the tables for that. And I'll now also need to run the script to create the table used for business transaction monitoring. So I'll run that. And that is now created those tables. So now if I run db2 list tables, just connect to the database. And now if I run db2 list tables, you can see that these tables have been created. So these tables have just been created. There is nothing in them. So if I do a db2 select count star from WMB bus trends, for example, it has no records in there, and same for WMB messages. So there are no records in these tables at the moment. So that has created for tables. And now I'm going to create a node. But before I create a node, I need to set up an ODBC connection so that I can access the database table. And to do that, I need to create a vault and specify a credential. So first I'm going to check that I can actually access my database from App Connect Enterprise. So I can run the mqsi cvp command for that. And that shows that I've connected okay. And now I'm going to set up my vault using mqsi vault. There is information on this command in the IBM documentation, and we have other resources in our App Connect Enterprise blogs. So that's created a vault key, and now I'm going to create the node which uses the vault key which is defined in the vault. So this is just running IBM int create node, and it's using the vault that I've defined with the specified vault key. The node has been created, and now I'm going to go ahead and start the node. Okay, so the node has started, and it used a vault key which was in the vault RC location. So now that I've created my node and specified the vault, now I'm going to create an integration server called server for recording, and it will have the sole purpose for recording messages to the database. I'm not going to deploy any flows to this integration server. So I'll just create this integration server using the IBM int command. So the server is called server for recording. So that's been created successfully. And now that I've created that server, I'm now going to define the credentials for that server to access the database tables. So this is using the mqsi credentials command. And for more information on that command, you can also access details for it in IBM documentation. Okay, so now that integration server has been created and it can access the database, I'm going to create the two other integration servers, and they will have message flows deployed to them. So I'm going to call them server 1 and server 2. So that's server 1 that's created, and I'll create server 2. Okay, so I've created my node and 3 integration servers, and if I list the node, I can see that it will have 3 integration servers created. So now that I've created my node and my integration servers, I'm now going to configure the YAML files which are used by the node so that I can use business transaction monitoring. So I'm going to update the node conf YAML in the overrides directory. So I'm just going to copy this directory location. So it's under program data IBM mqsi components, name of your node / overrides. So if I go to this directory, I can see that there is a node.conf.yaml in the overrides directory at the moment. And if I edit this file, I'm going to add a few entries to it. So the first entry I'm going to add is to specify the name of the default queue manager to use. So I'll add that there. Next, I'm going to specify that monitoring should be enabled in the node conf YAML. So that will mean all integration servers that are owned by this node will inherit this setting. Finally, I'm going to enable business transaction monitoring as well. So this has added an entry to enable business events to be monitored. Okay, so in node conf YAML, I've added the entry for the default queue manager, an entry for monitoring, and an event entry for business events. Okay, so I can save that. And now that I've done that, I'm now going to update the server conf YAML for the integration server that does the actual recording. So I'm going to update the server conf YAML in the overrides directory for this integration server. So there is no server conf YAML in the overrides directory for this server at the moment, so I'm going to create one. So if I do new text document and call it server.conf.yaml, that will create the empty file, and I am going to copy this section here, which defines the data store for this integration server to use. So this is the details for the data store to be used, and so this is the name of the database and the schema name as well. So that will be used by the integration server for recording. So I'll save that. So I've set up the YAML files for the node and the server. So I will just stop the integration node and start it for the changes to take effect. Okay, so the node stopped, so now I'll just start the node. Okay, so the node has started. So now if I deploy my flows to the servers, so I've got server 1, server 2, and I've have a server for recording. So each of the applications will need this shared library, so I'll just deploy that first. Okay, and deploy it to server 2. Okay, so server 1 and server 2 have got the shared libraries, and now I will deploy retail app to server 1. So that's deployed now, and I'll deploy retail order item app to server 2, and that's deployed. So now I have my applications and flows deployed. So now I'm going to create my business transaction definition so that business transactions can be captured and viewed in the web user interface. I'm going to start for web UI, and I will just find out the port that is being used by the integration node. So it is running on 4422. So if I start my web user interface for the node, I can see the 3 integration servers, and there's a new option here now to go to business transactions. So I don't have a business transaction definition at the moment. If I go to the configure tab, I can create a business transaction definition. So I'm going to select the integration server that's going to be used to record the business transactions. So that is my server for recording. Remember, that's the one whose sole purpose is for recording for transactions. And the name of a business transaction definition will be called order item. And I'll create a policy project for it. I'll call it order item policy project. And in that policy project, it will contain a policy, and that will be called order item policy. So I can go ahead and create that. So the business transaction definition has been created, and now I can add business events to that business transaction definition. So I'm going to create an event. So the first event I'm going to create is the start event. So I'll give it a name. I'm going to call it start event. So it's of type start. It's going to be emitted by a flow that's running in server 1 from the retail app. and the flow is the main process order flow, and the event source will be this receive retail request terminal.out. So I'll create that one. So that's my start event, and now I'm going to create a few progress events and then my end event and failure event. So this next one is going to be called receive order, and it's a progress event. This will be emitted by a flow that's deployed to server 2. So remember, this can work across different integration servers that are owned by the integration node. So I'll select my flow. So this is the request flow, and the monitoring event is the order item input queue.terminal.out. So I'll create that. So I have a progress event. Let's create another one. So this one is going to be for the handling of the dispatch. I will call it that dispatch team handling order. Will be progress event. It's also going to be emitted by flow running in server 2. Select my application. It's not in a library, and select my flow. It's for dispatch flow, and the monitoring event will be compute.terminal.in. So it's the input terminal to the compute node. And one more progress event, and this will be confirming that the item has been ordered. So I will say the name is confirm item ordered, and it's a progress event. It'll be emitted by a flow running in server 2. So select the application. It's not in the library, and this is in the response flow, and the monitoring event is the confirm item ordered terminal.out. Okay, so I have a start and 3 progress events. So now I'm going to create an end event to indicate the end when the business transaction is ends. So select the event type of end. This will be emitted by a flow running in server 1 this time, and in the main retail app. It's not in the library, and I'll select the main process order flow, and the event source is the send retail response. So click create, and now I can add the failure event. So click on here and specify the name of the event. So this is handling when an item is unknown, and I'll specify it's a failure event. Specify the integration server server 1. It's in the retail app. It's not in the library, and I'll select the message flow. It's in the main process order flow, and the event source is the unknown order terminal.in. Okay, so I've specified all my business events for my business transaction definition. I'm happy with all of those events, and so I'm going to start monitoring. I can see a confirmation that monitoring has started. So now if I switch to the monitor tab, I will in a moment see transactions, but first I need to send in the messages. So I will send in the messages to my flows, and now if I refresh, I can see some messages. I can see some messages are in progress, and I can see some messages have failed, and I can see some messages are complete. If I select a message, I can see the events that have been received. So I can see the start event, the 3 progress events, and the end event, and I can select any of these events and see details of those events. If I want to see a particular set of transactions, so for example, if I just want to see the failed transactions, I can select failed, and I can see the details of that. I can see, if I select the handle unknown order, I can see the details of that event. I can click on the data tab and I can see information about it. So it's an invalid request. And I can also click on errors and see information there as well. Okay, so that is how I set up business transaction monitoring from scratch. It didn't take too long. And let's just describe a summary of what I did. So in this video, I described the steps that are needed to configure business transaction monitoring. In order to use business transaction monitoring capability, you must have a database and IBM MQ installed. So currently, IBM DB2 and Oracle databases are supported by AppConnect Enterprise. Configuration must be made in the node.conf YAML to enable monitoring for the node-owned servers that have the message flows deployed. A data store must be defined in the server.conf YAML for the integration server that is used for recording the data to the database. I had already defined monitoring events in my flows, and I'd used a global correlation ID in each monitoring event so that they can be linked to a single instance of a business transaction. So I then created a business transaction definition, and I defined the business events in it using the configure tab. And then after sending the messages to my flows, I could monitor the business transactions using the monitor tab. And this showed me the instances of the business transactions and the overall state, which was one of in progress, complete, inconsistent, or failed. And I could view each individual business transaction to see details of each business event.